Hello, I'm Simon Ford, and you're listening to Psycho Killer, the podcast about real crimes that shocked the world. Come with me as I unravel the warped mind of a psychopath and multiple murderer whose crimes horrified America. Arthur-Warren-Waite was a charmer with a winning smile and a heart as black as a moonless night in Montana. Pip Watts can tell us more.
Arthur Waite was born on the 2nd of December 1887 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. His parents were of modest means. They gave Arthur the best education they could afford. At no small cost to themselves, they sent their son to study dentistry at the University of Michigan-Ann-Arbor. Arthur caught the eye of two Ann Arbor dental alumni, Messrs. Wellman and Bridgman. They paid for the promising graduate to study in Glasgow, Scotland, before joining their flourishing practice in South Africa. In 1910, Arthur walked down the gangplank at Cape Town and he had the world at his feet. But within a few short years, he was fired. Here's former major crime detective Jack Morrell.
In one respect, Waite's career was in tatters. In another, he'd done very nicely for himself. Within weeks of the outbreak of World War I, Waite sailed back to the United States, his baggage lined with 20,000 dubiously acquired dollars. It seems he'd been filling his pockets, as well as his clients' teeth, with dental gold. Messrs. Wellman and Bridgman terminated Waite's contract and let him go to avoid a scandal. It was a case of damage limitation.
The Arthur Waite who returned to Grand Rapids in the fall of 1914 was a very different man from the lanky lad who'd studied at the local university. He was tall, handsome, athletic, suntanned, with a twinkle in his eye and a mouth of pearly white teeth. He was also a crack tennis player, perfectly groomed, unfailingly urbane, and had acquired a British accent. It's fair to say he swept the society ladies of little old Grand Rapids off their feet. The superficial charm, so emblematic of a psychopathic personality, had them all fooled. Waite's dazzling smile hid a scheming, ambitious mind that would stop at nothing. If there was one thing Waite loved more in the world than the adoring attention of his doting female fans, it was money. Lots of easy money. The kind of money that would furnish a playboy lifestyle. He was determined to be a millionaire by the quickest, easiest route possible. Waite's strategy was simple. He was going to bag himself a rich wife.
The object of his affection was Clara Louise Peck, a woman 3 years his junior. The two had known each other since they were children, and while Arthur's parents scrimped and saved, Clara wanted for nothing, because she was the only daughter of the millionaire drug manufacturer John E. Peck. Jealousy, the green-eyed monster, had Waite firmly in his grip, and the green in question was the colour of dollar bills, and Clara stood to inherit lots of them. Waite mounted a charm offensive. He invited himself to the Peck mansion. He followed them on holiday to Florida, where he dazzled them with his brilliance on the tennis courts of Palm Beach. He wowed their social circle, and eventually he smarmed his way into the family's confidence. Well, all except Clara's brother Percy, who found himself eclipsed by the dazzling personality and smile of Arthur Waite. Before long, Grand Rapids was treated to a society wedding. On the 19th of September 1915, the happy couple tied the knot at the Fountain Street Baptist Church. Now Arthur Waite really had something to smile about.
During his courtship of Clara, Waite deployed another of the psychopath's traits. He was a consummate, compulsive and convincing liar. He inflated his medical qualifications. Not only was he a dentist, he was a highly skilled surgeon. He started styling himself doctor on his return to the United States, and by 1915 he'd concocted a false persona, a brilliant medical man steeped in research, particularly in the study of microbic causes of disease. Deadly germs became an obsession. By hook or by crook, Waite laid his hands on cultures of diphtheria, typhoid, and the influenza virus. The more virulent, the better. But his experiments were far from humanitarian. The deadly dentist was looking to extract more than teeth. He was planning to murder his in-laws. The problem with Clara's inheritance was that both her parents, though over 60, were in very good health. Waite wasn't satisfied with the wedding gifts lavished upon him and Clara. They had a luxury apartment on Riverside Drive in Manhattan, New York's swankiest neighborhood at the time, and it was there that Arthur Waite wove his web of deceit and spent Clara's generous allowance.
Everyone was convinced by Waite's stories. He said he was a consultant surgeon at several of New York's most renowned hospitals. When he wasn't tending the sick, sometimes staying all night at a patient's bedside, he was wowing the city's fashionistas on the tennis circuit, becoming metropolitan amateur champion. I'll say this for Arthur Waite, he had a lot of energy. And he was careful to set aside plenty of time in his busy schedule to schmooze his wife's aunt, Catherine. The grand old lady lived in the Park Avenue Hotel, and she was starstruck. She entrusted the good doctor with $40,000 to invest for her. She handed over a power of attorney, which gave him access to most of her liquid assets, and she made him the main beneficiary of her will.
But Aunt Catherine was Plan B. Plan A, the motherlode if you like, called for the demise of Clara's parents. They were invited to visit the happy couple at 435 Riverside Drive for a short vacation. Within a day or two of arriving in the Big Apple, Mr. Peck started feeling decidedly seedy. Arthur diagnosed a cold and produced a remedy of his own mix, which he sprayed into his father-in-law's throat each evening. Presently, Mr. Peck decided to see his own physician and return to Grand Rapids with his wife when his symptoms miraculously disappeared.
John E. Peck had the constitution of an ox. He decided the city air disagreed with him. The next time an invitation arrived from 435 Riverside Drive, Clara's mom Hannah went by herself. It was Christmas time. Central Park would have looked magical in the snow. Mother and daughter welcomed the new year in Times Square. Little did the older woman know she had but a few short weeks to live. Hannah Peck was under her son-in-law's spell, but even she was surprised by the amount of time he spent working or devoted to philanthropic research. He was absent from home for days on end. He was called away at all hours to perform delicate eye operations, once rushing out in the middle of dinner. Such dedication to duty. Arthur was a golden boy. The trouble was, the golden boy had feet of clay and a supercharged libido.
Within 6 months of getting married, he'd started an affair with Margaret-Weaver-Horton, an actress and singer. Margaret was a married woman. Her husband was Henry Mack-Horton, an aeronautical engineer 20 years her senior. There'd been other women in Waite's life, but Margaret was the special one. He installed her at the Plaza Hotel, where they registered as Dr. and Mrs. A.W. Walters. This meant he could use the fancy luggage that he'd taken on his honeymoon, complete with his initials monogrammed on it, the Wily Fox.
But Margaret would have to wait. Her lover parked with the engine running and returned to the bosom of his family, where Hannah Peck was suddenly struck down by a mysterious illness. Even her medical genius of a son-in-law was baffled. The local doctor, William H. Porter, was equally puzzled. Eventually, he diagnosed kidney disease and wrote a prescription. Dr. Waite strongly disagreed. Mother was gravely ill, he said, and he warned Clara to prepare for the worst. Waite devoted himself to the care of his mother-in-law. He cancelled all his engagements to spend hours at her bedside. When he wasn't treating her, he'd be playing gramophone records or singing to her. He bought her flowers and foot warmers. If this was murder, then he was killing her with kindness.
Then there was the curious incident of the nighttime gas leak. Clara woke up and smelled gas. It was coming from her mother's room. She opened the door to find the fire unlit, but the gas tap turned on. "Oh, an oversight," explained Arthur. "And the blanket stuffed along the bottom of the door? Well, Mother had complained of a draught," he said. "Still, no harm done." A week later, in the small hours of Sunday the 30th of January, Mrs. Peck passed away. She was only 64. Back in Grand Rapids, Michigan, her own physician, Dr. Perry Schertz, was confused. Hannah Peck hadn't had a day's illness in her life. As far as he was concerned, and as he would later testify, she had the kidneys of a 10-year-old. Nevertheless, neither Schertz nor any other doctor would have the opportunity to carry out an autopsy, because despite a lifelong wish to be buried in the family vault, Mrs. Peck had had a last-minute change of heart. She wanted her mortal remains to be cremated, and her son-in-law quickly attended to it. In a sort of compromise, the family interred Hannah's ashes in the vault. Emotionally, John was a broken man. Physically, though, there was nothing wrong with him. But all that was about to change. In his grief, he left the Michigan mansion and went to live with his daughter in New York. It wasn't long before John E. Peck took to his bed at 435 Riverside Drive. Once again, a doctor, A.A. Moore, was summoned. He diagnosed a digestive disturbance and prescribed something for diarrhea. Once again, Arthur-Waite disagreed. He became a prophet of doom. He dropped everything to care for his father-in-law. He was especially insistent that father took his medicine. In fact, he mixed it into his soup. When the millionaire turned his nose up at that, Waite told the maid he'd put some in the older man's teapot.
John E. Peck was too ill to celebrate his 73rd birthday on the 4th of March 1916. 17 days later, 6 weeks to the day since his wife's passing, Mr. Peck died. Clara found his body, as she had found her mother's. Arthur said he'd make the funeral arrangements, including organising a cremation. A few days later, husband and wife accompanied the casket on the sad train journey from New York to Grand Rapids. The mourners who met them were stone-faced.
The trains on the New York Central Railroad were fast, but not as swift as the electric telegraph. For as the Waite's train steamed out of Grand Central Station, the line-side wires were humming with a telegram that would derail the deadly dentist's ruthless get-rich-quick plan for good. The text read, "Suspicions aroused, stop. Demand autopsy, stop. Keep telegram secret, stop. K, stop. Adams, stop." The telegram was addressed to Percy Peck, Clara's brother. He had no idea who K. Adams was. Was this some cruel hoax? Percy began seeing certain events in a new light. Why had his otherwise healthy parents died so suddenly and within weeks of each other? Why had his mother changed her will in favour of cremation? Was there a connection with New York? And what did his smarmy golden boy of a brother-in-law know about it?
Percy met with Dr. Schertz and the local pastor, the Reverend Wishart. Both expressed their own concerns. Schertz couldn't fathom Hannah Peck's fatal kidney condition. Reverend Wishart was perturbed by Arthur-Waite's insistence on cremation. He said he'd noticed Waite staring weirdly at the face in the open casket throughout the funeral service. Now, it seems obvious to us, all these decades after the event, but the family was only just starting to join the dots. Join them, though, they did. When Percy met Arthur on the platform, he demanded the casket be offloaded. "But," said Waite, "everything's fixed. I've arranged for poor Dad's body to go right on to Detroit to be cremated. I'll go with it and see this sad business finished."
Percy didn't exactly say, "not so fast," but words to that effect were uttered, and Johnny Peck's embalmed body headed off to the local undertakers instead. That evening, a smiling Arthur-Waite knocked on the door with a rose. He wanted to put it in the casket. The undertaker turned him away, then locked the door and lowered the shade.
The shock of it all overwhelmed Clara. She decided to recuperate in Grand Rapids after the funeral, while Arthur, ever the devoted physician, returned to his practice in New York. He thought he was leaving the grim, suspicious faces behind him, but that was far from the truth. Percy, Dr. Schertz and the Reverend Wishart had a head start. They were already in New York, briefing Raymond Schindler, the owner of a detective agency. Schindler had gained entry to 435 Riverside Drive while the Waites were away. He'd opened a wall safe. It was stuffed full of greenbacks, what was left of the $40,000 Aunt Catherine had asked Waite to invest for her. Waite had sent $10,000 to his brother Frank, along with a note. "There's more where this came from," it read. Suffice to say, Frank was not a stockbroker.
As Waite stepped off the train at Grand Central Station, one of Schindler's team was there, blending into the crowd, watching him through the reflection in a window. Waite was the subject of covert surveillance. The first thing he did was to phone his lover, Margaret-Horton. He told her to check out of the plaza immediately. He knew things were heating up and he was getting ready to run. Meanwhile, Peck, Dr. Schertz and Reverend Wishart went to the district attorney, who alerted the NYPD. It wasn't just the authorities, though, that were on the case. The newspapers had also heard rumours, and they'd started muckraking. The allegations surrounding Waite, including all the juicy tidbits of his affair with Maggie Horton, appeared in print long before a copper came close to feeling his collar. It's hard to hide when you're plastered all over the front pages.
Arthur Waite telephoned Aunt Catherine and asked her, "What is the best thing for a man to do who has been cornered? Do you think suicide would be the right thing?" Aunt Catherine counselled against it. Then came the hammer blow. After the funeral, when the Reverend Wishart was removing his vestments, John Peck's body was supposed to go to the crematorium. But the deceased made a detour. His remains arrived eventually at the medical school of the University of Michigan, where a detailed analysis of his intestines revealed the cause of death. John E. Peck had been poisoned with arsenic. A hell of a lot of it. They detected 5 grains, that's more than 300 milligrams, still in his body after the morticians had embalmed it. One way or another, even if he didn't realise it, Mr. Peck went down fighting. On hearing the news from Ann Arbor, Arthur-Warren-Waite decided to ignore Aunt Catherine's advice. When the police arrived at Riverside Drive, they found the suspect had taken a handful of sleeping tablets. Undeterred, they conveyed him to Bellevue Hospital, where he was revived. Later, in the detention ward, detectives caught Waite sending a draft for $1,000 to his maid Dora. He wanted her to deny ever having seen him slip medicine into his father-in-law's food and drink.
Waite was arrested for murder. He laughed at them when they read him his rights. He claimed the whole thing was just too absurd to be true. District Attorney Edward H. Swan made it his business to sit at Waite's bedside. Meanwhile, the police found evidence that Waite had purchased 90 grains of arsenic from a Dr. Muller. Waite had convinced him that he wanted to euthanize a cat, and Muller had bought his story. One up to the police. Their next significant witness was Eugene Kane, the undertaker who'd embalmed Mr. Peck's body. Waite had bribed him to put arsenic in the embalming fluid. Now, this was once a common mortician's technique, but it had been banned some years before because it conveniently masked evidence of arsenic poisoning. It took Waite a few minutes and $9,000 in cash to win the undertaker's cooperation. It cost the police nothing and took them less time to crack him. He took them to where he'd stashed the cash, and luckily for the cops, Kane had double-crossed Waite. He never actually put the arsenic in the embalming fluid. When District Attorney Swan put this evidence to Waite, it wiped that smile off his face and his mind, went into overdrive.
When Arthur-Warren-Waite was brought to trial in the middle of May 1916, he pleaded not guilty to the murders of his parents-in-law, despite the weight of evidence against him and a letter he'd written to a New York newspaper in which he made a fulsome and very public confession. On the day Dr. Waite took the stand, the courtroom was packed wall to wall to see the accused man with his matinee idol good looks. But Waite would not play the Latin lover or the contrite son-in-law. No, it was pantomime time, and he was playing the fool.
A tally of his adolescent misdemeanours was laid before him. We now call this evidence of bad character. It included how he'd stolen $1,000 from another dental student's trunk, but had put it back after being seen doing it. Then there was all that gold business in South Africa and his $20,000 payoff. Incredibly, Waite admitted it all, and threw a cheeky wink to the jurors, who were reprimanded for laughing out loud at the accused man's antics. Waite was displaying what psychiatrists call shallow effect, that is, totally lacking in any token of embarrassment, guilt, or remorse. Classic psychopathic behaviour.
The worse the accusations against him, the more he damned himself from his own lips. Yes, he'd married Clara Peck for money. Yes, he knew he'd have to murder his parents-in-law and Aunt Catherine too. No matter. "Are you crazy?" asked the prosecutor. "I think not," replied Waite, "unless it's crazy to want money." Given time, he added, he would almost certainly have murdered Clara too. She was not my equal in anything. When I'd got rid of her, I meant to find a more beautiful wife, Waite told the court.
The motive was clear. Arthur-Warren-Waite was poisoning the Pecks for money, and there he was on the stand, chattering away about it all, exhibiting what psychiatrists describe as dissociation phenomenon. He seemed completely detached from reality. His account of the murders was forthright, detailed, and chilling. First, he cheerily recounted how he tried to kill Aunt Catherine by lacing her food with various pathogens. When the germs failed, he tried arsenic, and for good measure, he put ground glass in her marmalade. Aunt Catherine complained to the grocer. Who knows what would have happened to her had Mr. Peck not come to stay?
"I started poisoning her from the very first meal after she arrived," admitted Waite. "I gave her 6 assorted tubes of pneumonia and diphtheria germs and influenza virus in her food. Then she became ill and took to her bed. Dr. Porter had prescribed barbiturates to help Mrs. Peck sleep. One evening, while playing the doting son-in-law, Waite ground up 12 5-grain Veronal tablets, that's nearly 4 grams of barbiturate, and dissolved them in her medicine."
"And what did you do after you'd given your mother-in-law a fatal dose of poison?" asked counsel. "Why, I guess I went back to sleep, of course," replied Waite. "I woke up in the small hours and went along to her room. She was quite dead. I came quietly out of the room and went back to bed again, so it would be my wife who would discover the body."
All the time, Waite was smiling at the jury, who seemed engrossed in his story and tickled by his jocular asides. It was, in the words of crime writer Richard Whittington Egan, murder most suave.
Mr. Peck had been harder to kill. It took weeks. Waite gave the septuagenarian millionaire large doses of just about everything he had. Typhoid, diphtheria, pneumonia, germs and influenza virus in his soup and in his rice puddings, all to no effect. He sprayed tuberculosis up his father-in-law's nose and other nasty germs down his throat. Even that didn't put the redoubtable Mr. Peck off his food.
Waite put damp sheets on his bed and left the window open, hoping the old man would catch pneumonia. Not so much as a sniffle. He drove him around sitting on the wet seat of his automobile. If anything, Mr. Peck enjoyed the bracing winter air all the more. So Waite tried gassing him. Fumes of hydrochloric acid and chlorine made no impact on his father-in-law's cast-iron constitution. He tried leaving the gas on, but the janitor smelled it and Waite had to turn it off.
Eventually, our deadly dentist turned to arsenic. I gave him the lot, he admitted. The whole 90 grains. That's equal to almost 6,000 milligrams. Now, if you've got a packet of painkillers handy, you'll appreciate just how much that is. Waite spiked Mr. Peck's eggnog, his soup, his oatmeal, his rice pudding, his milk and his tea, you name it. If it was destined for the old man's meal tray, Waite put arsenic in it. Yet incredibly, even after a single dose of 18 grains, at least 6 times the amount fatal in humans, Johnny Peck clung stubbornly, some might say courageously, to life.
Waite had exhausted his supply of arsenic. The germs hadn't worked, so now he was faced with the prospect of his father-in-law recovering. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Waite rifled through his wife's medicine cabinet where she kept a bottle of chloroform. Pretending it would ease the sick man's pain, he held a cloth soaked in the anaesthetic over John Peck's nose and mouth. Once he was under, Waite held a pillow over his face until life was extinct. Then, as before, he crept back into the marital bed and waited for his wife to discover the corpse in the morning.
You might think that Waite's full and free admission of guilt was a form of suicide, a VIP ticket to Ol Sparky. After all, he tried to take his own life before. However, after his suicide attempt and Waite's admission that he'd poisoned his father-in-law with arsenic, the district attorney asked him if he'd had any accomplices. Only this other fellow, the self-accused man replied. What other fellow? Demanded Edward H. Swan. Why, the man from Egypt, he replied.
He's always been inside me ever since I can remember. He's made me do things against my will. He made me take up the study of germs, as if I used them I wouldn't be detected. I was compelled against my will to put them in my father-in-law's food. Try as I would, I couldn't get rid of my murderous other self. Often I've gone for long walks and fought against the evil one and tried to run away from him, but he was so fleet of foot he always caught up with me.
A Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde scenario?
Yes, some kind of split personality disorder, perhaps. But Arthur-Warren-Waite was an accomplished liar, one of the many hallmarks of a psychopath. And on the stand, he spun a fantastic story about his reincarnated alter ego. I believe that although my body lives in America, my soul lives in secret in Egypt, Waite told the court. It is the man from Egypt who committed these crimes. Or rather, I should say, compelled Waite to act against his better nature. When my father-in-law came to stay with me, I wanted to help him all I could, he elaborated. Then the man from Egypt said Peck was too old to live, that he ought to die, and if he did die, I wouldn't have to worry about money. I did my best, but the man from Egypt was in control. Try as I would, I found it impossible to get rid of him.
Now, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see how Waite was laying the foundations for a change of plea, from not guilty to guilty by means of insanity, which, if the judge had accepted it, would see the deadly dentist committed to a mental institution rather than sent to walk the green mile to the electric chair. This type of defence has been well used since, but this was one of the first cases and where it was used so audaciously. So, how convincing was the man from Egypt? Well, when pressed for the details, Waite was remarkably unforthcoming. He mentioned Caesar and Cleopatra, palm trees and pyramids, but the picture he painted was two-dimensional and punctuated with some carefully chosen outbursts of hand-wringing craziness. Whatever they say of me, Waite whelped, I pride myself on being kind and always giving water to flowers so that they will not die. So what was it to be? A couple of decades in a padded cell, or 2,000 volts at 7 to 12 amps? Well, the psychiatrists who'd examined Waite pronounced him sane. Dr. Jelliffe told the court,
"The prisoner knew the nature and quality of his act. He was fully aware of all the phases of his crime. In my opinion, he is an average man, somewhat superficial, inclined to be snobbish, and of no great intellectual attainments."
A damning analysis, if ever there was one. But the witness who blew the insanity defence wide open was none other than Waite's one-time lover, Maggie Horton. When the rumours were flying and the press snapping at their heels, Arthur had taken her to his laboratory and shown her tiny germs wriggling under a microscope. That was when she asked him point blank, "You didn't really do it, did you, Arthur?" To which he answered, "Yes, it's true, I did." Later, he wrote her a delusional letter, which she destroyed on legal advice, containing words to the effect of, "If they prove it, I'll go to the electric chair, but I hope and expect to spend a little while in detention as an imbecile, and then I'll be free to join you again." It took the jury 20 minutes and one ballot to find Arthur-Warren-Waite guilty.
Arthur Waite was taken upriver to Sing Sing and a cell on death row. The case was referred to the Court of Appeals, which ruled Waite's sentence must stand. His attorney applied to the governor to have a panel of doctors examine the prisoner and determine the issue of his sanity. The governor washed his hands of the matter.
When Waite was told the news, he reportedly hummed a tune and said, "Ooh, is that so?" Then he sat down in the death cell and wrote a note to the warden asking for his execution to be scheduled for the following Monday. Warden Moyer screwed it up and set the night of Thursday the 24th of May 1917 for Waite's electrocution.
The condemned man whiled away his final hours reading poetry and the Bible. Shortly after 11 p.m, he strolled down the corridor to the execution chamber. "Goodbye, boys," he called to his fellow death row inmates. One of the reporters called to witness the execution wrote,
"I saw him step into the room. I saw him advance a few steps to the chair. Waite blinked at the glare of the lights. There were 20 people in the room. He was strapped in the chair."
A warder placed a wet sponge on the shaved top of Waite's head and clamped an electrode on top of it. Another electrode was attached over his spine. The deadly dentist looked around the room and uttered his last words. "Is this all there is to it?" A few seconds later, after the ghastly process of electrocution, a Dr. Squire pronounced Waite dead. He was 29 years old.
2 weeks later, Clara sued Eugene Kane for $7,000. That was what was left of the bribe her husband had given the undertaker. She remarried in Pasadena in 1920.
Maggie Horton's husband forgave her. Her reputation recovered from the scandal, and she resumed her singing career.
Another mystery was cleared up during Waite's trial: the identity of Kay Adams, the sender of that crucial telegram. Around the time of Mr. Peck being taken seriously ill, a lady called Elizabeth Hardwick was having dinner with her daughter at the Hotel Plaza, when in walked Dr. Waite with a ravishing raven-haired woman she recognised as Margaret Horton. Waite strode over to the Hardwicks' table and introduced his companion as his nurse, who just assisted him in a complicated operation at Bellevue Hospital. But Mrs. Hardwick was no fool. Weeks later, when she heard that Mr. Peck had died so soon after his wife, she put two and two together. It was she and her daughter who sent the telegram under the false name Kay Adams.
Lastly, and goodness knows there have been more endings to this shocking true crime story than a few, Arthur-Warren-Waite left a kind of message from beyond the grave. It was a note addressed to Dr. Squire, who'd attended the execution and performed the autopsy afterwards. On a single sheet of paper, Waite had written a stanza of Robert Louis Stevenson's Night Prayer. "Call us with morning faces, eager to labour, eager to be happy." But he omitted the last line, and if the day be marked for sorrow, strong to endure it. Was the deadly dentist having the last word? Well, we'll never know. Maybe the man from Egypt made him do it.
Well, that's all for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of Psycho Killer, you might like to show your appreciation at buymeacoffee.com/psychopals. That's 1 large cappuccino, 3 straws. Oh, and hold the arsenic.
Thank you for your generosity. We'll see you again soon on the dark side for another Psycho Killer shocking true crime story.